G'day, sports fans. Another Sports by Fry podcast coming at you, recapping round 15 for all the AFL Fantasy faithful out there. And a big celebration today because we've reached the end of the bye rounds. I don't know about you, but I had way too much pleasure shuffling all my gun players back onto my field, removing all these crappy rookies that have been contributing to our best 18 scores for the last, call it, month of fantasy footy. And now it gets interesting. There's a lot of coaches out there who've removed all the rookies from their field. There's a couple of players that none of us are happy that we still have, but the trading game is going to be kicking in over these last 9 rounds. So I'm going to run through some of the important stats from last weekend, talk about possible trade targets, bit of a tag watch projecting ahead to round 16. And of course, I'll be jumping into all the important rookies and cash cows as well. So let's get into the round review. A 1947 is what the large Fries and Coke scored, which by my standards was probably a bit over what I was expecting. I think I moved up a couple of thousand spots. I'm still in no man's land in the middle of the teens. I'm just inside the top 16,000, but I'm pretty confident with how my squad's looking. My trades ended up being Jeremy Sharp to Zach Merritt, a move that I had locked in since before lockout lifted. I made sure I bankrolled the cash to do that. Then I did a bit of rookie shuffling by going Fraser out to Colton Tholstrup, the D's rookie that I've been very bullish on. Anyone who's listened to these podcasts or subscribed to the Patreon bits and pieces knows that I'm a big fan of what he was doing at Casey, and he rewarded me and everyone else that brought him in instantly. My third trade I was really stuck on. I ended up pulling the trigger on Jack McRae out so that I had 20 playing this week. Could have gone up to Jai Caldwell, but I kept the cash in my pocket so that I could get Jai Simpkin instead. So I lost, call it 40 to 50 points there, but that extra 150 grand I think will be very, very convenient this week in removing Tom Powell, my last pesky, annoying player that I've been trying to ditch for months. Hopefully he goes this week with my trade. So round rank inside the top 8,000. If I could halve my rank over the last, call it, third of the fantasy season, I'd be pretty chuffed. I'm not going to get greedy, though. I'm just going to aim to keep moving forwards each week. As I said, though, there are a lot of coaches out there who had some big scores. The Sports by Fry League casting our eyes ahead. Mitchmond, not Mitch Casey, the 7th overall ranked coach and a great content creator out there. Shout out to Mitch Casey. But Mitchmond, and I'm talking Mitchell White's squad, they now lead the Sports by Fry League. Pretty strong week from him with a score of just under 2,000. Moved him up to 58th overall, but Cause of Trouble is still hanging around. He's ranked 64th overall, had a 2053, if you don't mind, this round. And Bushwick's Bombers, shout out to Chloe's team, sitting 101st, still very much in hat contention. I think those 3 coaches are probably the ones that we're going to watch carefully over the last third of the round to see, third of the season, to see if they can win out the Sports by Fry League and finish with a hat. A couple of other coaches inside the top 150. Tyler's team, Laird's Little Leprechauns, like that one. And it's more than a game. Jason's squad sitting 115th overall. So very competitive in the Sports by Fry League. I'm still just behind the halfway mark. There's almost 400 coaches in the league, and I'm sitting at about 212, 213. So still work to be done for the large Fries and Coke, but that's nothing new. Let's turn my attention now to the useless Sports by Fry stats from the weekend. First one is 144, which comes from the form player of the fucking competition, someone that I don't have in my team because, as I continue to illustrate, I do not like having a successful fantasy side, but Errol Goulden has been enormous the last couple of weeks. 154 is what he had on the weekend. That 144 is now his last 3 average. So he's gone 154, 127, 151. Anyone who pulled the trigger on him after his buy in round 12, a lot of smart coaches would have. They've been very handsomely rewarded. He's now the most expensive player in the game, the form player of the game, and the must-have out there for anyone like myself who doesn't have him. He only trails Max Gawn by 89 points for the highest total, for what it's worth. I think he's been dominant since, if you can count the 2 scores he had before the buy, he was even putting up numbers then with a couple of 110 pluses. So loving what I'm seeing from Errol Goulden. Also loved what I saw from a couple of the rookies over the weekend. So 75 was the next useless stat. That comes from Logan Evans. Now, he was 4th, I think, off the dome on my rookie trade targets this week. Let me fact check that as I go because I can multitask here. He was 4th. The top defensive option, though, for what it's worth. But I did not expect a 75-point performance from Logan on debut. I did think that he would slot into that halfback role and go all right, but he really stood up while a lot of his other Brisbane teammates struggled. So 75 points, near identical score that we saw from Ari Schoenmaker in his AFL debut. So those two, Evans and Schoenmaker, will be very popular trade targets for coaches that miss the boat if you want a green dot in defence. A very rare green dot, mind you. 54 is the next useless number. That's Jeremy Sharp's score combined for the last 2 weeks. This mofo is wrecking coaches' seasons if you're still stuck with him. The 15 points that he had against the Doggies, that was a bit of an anomaly, I thought. Freo got spanked in that game. But once again, Sharpie was just missing in this contest. He only had 13 touches, 1 mark, which is really down on some of the lofty mark totals we've seen from Sharpie when he was putting up big scores, the 85 plus, flirting with a couple of hundreds as well. So 39 points is all he finished with against the Gold Coast Suns. Massive, massive stinker, I'll be honest. He's dipped over 100K, bit over. He's almost 100K down in price over the last 2 weeks. So break even of 130 now. That's disgusting stuff. So anyone that still has Jeremy Sharp in their squad, you need to act quickly and get that mofo out. Another dud trade in from the weekend, Christian Salem's 53 was a real kick in the guts. There were over 10,000 coaches that brought him in. I was strongly considering it, decided that I needed to bolster my forward line rather than my back line. He was the third most traded in player ahead of the weekend. So you can take a little bit of a solace that he hit his break even of 49, but 53 points was not enough. He got subbed out. Obviously, he was carrying a knee knock injury into the game, which would have been fucking handy to know that before lockout. But as a result, there's a lot of coaches out there who are now kind of stuck with Salem, and some are even pulling the trigger and flicking him straight back out, which I kind of don't hate. I'll be honest. We thought that he would chew up a bit more midfield time. Maybe he would still flourish a little bit off the half-back line against North, but neither of those things happened. So Salem, if he's your worst performing player, which is possible because there's a lot of coaches, as I said at the lead-off out there, who have really strong fantasy outfits at the moment. There's nothing wrong with chopping Christian Salem now that his break-even's vaulted back up to the 90. 43 is the next useless stat. That came from Jai Caldwell's second quarter, which gave him 75 at the half. I don't want to say he was the best performing forward over the weekend because we still expect a big 111 out of Sammy Flanders. Zorko and Heaney were a bit unders, and I don't think that Caldwell can flirt with those three for a top 3 forward finish, but he might be the 4th best forward that we have available in the game. Finished on 126. He's a great trade target this week. The Dons fixture is actually pretty juicy as well, might I add. The only thing that scares me about Jai Caldwell is his role can change at the drop of a hat. So I understand the idea on why coaches will want to pull the trigger on him this week. Something I may consider myself, I'll be honest. But yeah, I still want to see a couple more consistent midfield scores from Caldwell. And he'll have a chance to do that this weekend against Geelong, who love to give up points to midfielders. 26 was the next useless number. And if anyone out there owns Clayton Oliver, they'll know why 26 is attached to his name. What the fuck was that, Clary? I know he was being tagged, but you're being tagged by Will Phillips. It's not like you were being locked down by prime Ryan Crowley or Kane Corns out there. Clayton is disgusting right now. 1 point first half, a lot of free kicks against. This 26 is the lowest score of his career. It beats out the 39 points that he scored in his 10th game of his career way back in 2016. Clary's now lost $337,000 on the season. And it won't shock me if I see him as one of the most traded out players this week. He looks like a shadow of the 110 premium that we all expect Clayton Oliver to be. So coaches out there who do have Clary in your lineup, I don't hate the idea of pulling the trigger on him. I'll be honest. His average now for the season is under 80. There's not a lot of encouraging things happening for the Melbourne Demons as they turn the corner for a finals or potential finals push. So I'd be flicking that mofo out and upgrading him if possible. Doesn't cost much to go to the most traded in player that I'll talk about soon in Connor Rowe Z. 22.7 is the next useless stat. That was attached to Kynan Brown. That's how many thousands of coaches grabbed him. He was the most traded in player. Saw his ownership go up by like 13 or 14%. Skyrocketed right up, and then he was the sub and struggled with an 8-point performance. Now, in saying that, he got all 8 of those points with a rundown tackle against Nick Larkey that effectively won the game for the Ds, sealed any momentum that North Melbourne had to try and come back and kick a goal to win that one. But there was 5,500 people that grabbed Tolstrup. Now, I know not everyone playing this game listens to Sports by Fry podcasts and looks at my rookie rankings, but I do put some time and effort into these things. I don't make it up. So the people out there who might have grabbed Brown over Tolstrup, sometimes paying that extra 60K does matter. The next useless stat I've got for you is 7. Now that the buys are done and dusted, we have 7 players who are averaging 110 on the fantasy season. I reckon you could name most of them off the dome, but if not, we have 1 defender in the form of Harry Sheasel. We have 2 midfielders in the form of Errol Goulden and Sammy Walsh, who hasn't played a full season, but by average, he's still going 110 plus. A couple of rucks in Max Gorn, the highest averaging player in the game, and Rowan Marshall, and then a few forwards in the form of Zorko and Heaney. So as we round the corner for home, I think it's fair to say that these. Oh, no, my apologies. There are 3 forwards now that Sammy Flanders has kicked into action, of course. So 8 players rather than 7 who are averaging 110. These are the guys you want to have in your team. You move heaven and earth to try and pay for them, even if it costs you top dollar. Someone like Errol Goulden, like I've said, is the form player of the competition. These forwards in the form of Zorko, Heaney, and Flanders are must-haves. The rucks, there's a lot of coaches who'd still be running with an English or Grundy in R2, maybe instead of Max or Marshall, which is okay. But by the time we get to the end of the season, we want to have those 2 big dogs. And Harry Sheasel, obviously, despite his role randomness, he's still been a dominant player. So if we extrapolate that back out and stretch it a bit to players who are averaging 100 on the season, it's no surprise that of the 27 blokes who are averaging 100, half of them are midfielders. So while there's a lot of talk about the scores that we're getting from half-backers and we need to fill our defense with these premiums, the midfield is still where we get our best scorers. And there's a lot of rogue, unique guys out there. Tim Taranto is one that springs to mind who has had a slower start to his season, but is starting to find form. Adam Treloar is perennially under-owned and is a fantastic pod. There's a couple of other midfielders you could target, like a Josh Dunkley. I know that Jordan Dawson's a very popular type, but another player that I think we need to have in our squads. There's a lot of midfielders that'll get you the 100 plus. So if you haven't finished your midfield, I don't want to say that that's a priority, but I think there's a lot being talked about the massive ceiling scores we've seen from defenders, and yet the midfield is still where we get the most bang for our buck. So just a couple of things to consider as we move towards the end of the buy rounds and we start looking for the final couple of best 22 caliber players. For the next useless sports by Fry stat, that's how many scores Lockie Neal has over 120 this season. Now, let me just paint you a quick picture, because Lockie Neal, he got tagged by Marcus Windhager a couple of weeks ago and scored a shitty 50 when a lot of people were looking at bringing him in. So no one was probably going to trade him in on the back of that. But he came out and dropped a 135 this weekend, one of the best scores of the entire round. I'm pretty sure Brayshaw and Goulden were the only 2 that topped him. So Lockie Neal's numbers are quite random over the middle portion of the fantasy season. He had that 135 last week, the 50 against Windy. Before that, he had 128 against, I want to say, the Doggies. Anyway, the opponent doesn't matter. Had his buy round. And then before that, he had scores of 100, 122, 80, and 137. So across the last weeks, when you take out the fact that he rested for the buy, the yo-yo performances are annoying, but he's actually averaging 107. And Lockie Neal is a player that not many coaches will be considering. He is another call him pod in the midfield. He's averaging under 100 for the season. Ownership is about 5.5%. I do like the fact that Brisbane are starting to find their mojo. 3 of the next 4 games are at the Gabba, and the one that they do play away is against West Coast at Optus. So Lockie Neal is a fantastic trade target that probably not a lot of coaches will be talking about, and it won't surprise me if he averages 105 plus for the rest of the season. He is a dual Brownlow medalist. If we said that he averaged 107 for the entire year, which is a bit of a stretch because he started slow, but let's play the hypothetical. That would give him the 13th best average in the game, just narrowly pipping his teammate at the moment in Josh Dunkley. So Lockie Neal, someone that probably deserves a bit more respect. The yo-yo performances do hurt, but if you have him in your team and you cop the 50, but then you cop the 135, it kind of all balances out in the end. The last number I want to talk about is the number 0, always mentioned in the useless Sports by Fry stats. And no offense to Hugh Davies, but anyone who plays 86% of the game and scores a 0, you're doing something wrong for fantasy coaches. I love the interaction from the fantasy community that we get out there. But like I said, I do put time and effort into these rookie rankings. So I think there was about 4,500 coaches that traded in Hugh Davies. Could have had Logan Evans for exactly the same price. Hugh Davies is a lockdown defender. He'd averaged about 30 with Peel Thunder, All the writing was on the wall for him to struggle. I thought he actually started the game reasonably well from a football standpoint. I still think that Josh Draper, Brennan Cox, Alex Pearce, all those key defenders should be played over him, but not terribly against getting some games into the young fella. So let's transition and use that to talk a little bit about the rookies. I've mentioned some of them already, but Colton and Logan Evans were the two best scorers on debut for a lot of coaches. I know that Colton did technically play a game earlier this year, but no one would have had him in their team. It's a shame that Brown and Cleary were forced to wear the sub vest because I was high on both of them as well. Probably a bit higher on Cleary over Kynan Brown because I thought Cleary and his versatility might see him get some midfield minutes, but neither of those things came to fruition. So as we're wheeling through each line, looking in defence, as I've said, Ari Schoenmaker and Logan Evans are the two cheap defensive rookies that we want to be targeting. If I had a gun to my head, I'd probably lean towards Logan Evans, partially because I don't love Ari Schoenmaker's job security. There was a couple of things that Ross said in the post-game presser after Schoenmaker made his debut against Brisbane that just gave me a little bit of cause for pause. Made me a little bit nervous that he might not be in the lineup this weekend. Obviously, they need to welcome Wanganeen Miller back into the team. It's a pretty like-for-like role, so don't be shocked if we don't see Ari named this round. In saying that, if he is playing, I do expect Ari Schoenmaker to be a better scorer for the rest of the season. Logan Evans, he does go up against St Kilda this week, ironically, and St Kilda do love to give up a shitload of points to defenders. So with those things all in mind, I think I'll give the edge just slightly to Logan at the moment, but team selection might force our hand in one specific way. Into the midfield, there's not a lot to love here. I know that Caden Cleary was out there. He kicked a goal with his first kick, joined the illustrious first kick, first goal club, but I don't see Sydney giving him an extended run and him shaking that sub vest. So as a result, I think it's fair to steer clear. Josh Sin falls into a similar boat. He was the bloke that came in for Travis Boak, kicked a goal early, and I thought we might be on here. We might see a Sid 65, 70, but he only finished with 45 points, break even of 21, and he's over the 300K mark now. So I probably still think anyone with defender mid or forward mid status is your best bet for the bench there. Hopefully you've still got a Fraser or a Bruce Revel or a Billy Dowling. You can use those blokes as your emergencies in the midfield if need be, because there's not a lot of standalone midfielders that are staking their claim for promotion at the moment. In the forward line, like I said, the momentum was swinging upwards for Kynan Brown, but being named the sub meant that he didn't really get a chance to run amok. Tholstrop was great and probably... I still think I have Billy Dowling rated ahead of him. Everyone's probably got Billy Dowling already. So if you don't, you can go for Tolstrop. But I do think that Billy Dowling is going to be a fantastic scorer, providing he keeps dodging that fucking dreaded vest. Shout out to Max Krzyzewski as well in his first AFL game. Was out there for the Giants, kicked a couple snags, but only scored 25 points. So he's not someone I would go after either. Turning my attention to the round 16 matchups. Before I dive into some of the trade talk here, let's talk a little bit about taggers. So Brisbane and Melbourne is the first game that we get of the round on Friday night. From a Brisbane standpoint, you'd expect Jared Berry to kind of run with someone. Maybe it's Clayton. I don't know who else you'd try and shut down if you're Chris Fagan. Maybe a Cozzy Pickett type, but Berry plays a lot more midfield, so I expect him to go head-to-head with someone like Clayton Oliver. Neil Bullen has done tagging jobs for Melbourne in the past, so maybe he goes to like a Neil, a McCluggage, or even Dane Zorko. I don't want to manifest that, but yeah, I think that Berry is the tag watch in this game, and if someone starts to run hot, maybe Neil Bullen goes and stands next to them at stoppages. North Melbourne, we've seen Will Phillips tag for a few weeks. They now clash with the Bulldogs. I'm not putting Will Phillips next to the Bont at stoppages if I'm Alistair Clarkson. That poor child will get feasted on. So maybe we see Will Phillips drop from the team. Maybe we see him used as the sub. And if someone, again, like I said with Berry, someone starts to pop off, they go and follow them a little bit. You could maybe try and shut down like a Libber or a Trelaw type. And Harvey Gallagher as well has followed some players at times with tags, but nothing really in this contest outside of Will Phillips, who, if I was running the Kangaroos, I don't know if I would play this week. I'd rather go head-to-head and put a Colby McKercher back in and take him on there. James Jordan is the next tagger out there that I want to discuss because he matches up with Jordan Clark this week. Now, we saw him go to JC in their first matchup, call it 5 or 6 weeks ago. Held Clarkey to 57 points. Since then, Jordan Clark has put up an illustrious run of form. So I'm not super scared about the James Jordan tag. I saw Lockie Whitfield kind of run amok and put James Jordan to work on Saturday, and as a result, he scored pretty handsomely. I think Jordan's going to find it a bit easier to shut down Clarkey. So we might be seeing a score in the 80s or 70s range. God forbid it's not something with a 6 or a 5 at the front of it. But I think that Clarkey is going to get a little bit of confidence out of the form that he's had. So he'll find a way to still put up a couple of points. We just might not see the 90 and the hundreds that we've seen week in, week out. If your team's in a very luxurious position, maybe you could trade Clark out, but I don't think you need to jump too much at the shadows. Just expect a couple of unders this week, potentially from Clarkey. For Collingwood, Bro McCreary, he's done jobs in the past. So going up against Gold Coast, maybe we see him go with a Rowell or a Took type, try and quell Noah Anderson's influence. But I think, like a couple of the guys I've already mentioned, McCreary will largely just do his own thing. And then if someone really starts to run hot, that's when Craig McRae might send a bow to others at stoppages. For GWS, though, Toby Bedford might be the form tagger of the competition. And going up against Adelaide, there's a couple of players here that he could very well go to and lock down. We have seen, though, that Bedford over the last fortnight has split a bit of time amongst different players. He obviously started on Zach Butters a couple of weeks ago against Port Adelaide, did a great job on him, and at times was with Connor Rosé around stoppages as well. Similar last week, we saw him start on Chad, and he kind of quelled his influence early. And then he spent a couple of minutes here or there trying to stop the run of Heaney and some of the other gun mids. So I do expect the Bedford tag to bounce around a bit. But if I'm Adam Kingsley, I'm trying to tag Isaac Rankin out of the game because your Jordan Dawson and your Rory Laird types, they're the primary ball winners. But Rankin, I feel like, is the one that can wrestle momentum for the Crows and try and win this game for them. So I will not be surprised if Bedford runs with any of those aforementioned dudes, Dawson, Laird, or Rankin. But yeah, a smart coach would probably start with Isaac Rankin and try and keep him under wraps early. And then if they have the game in hand, maybe then he rolls into the midfield and tries to run with one of the other blokes. I don't think you shut Saligo out, but it's a thought as well. Essendon played Geelong this week, which means that Matty Guelphy could come into action against Tom Stewart. Thought that Tommy Stewart was going all right last week. Full disclosure, I did not lock in and watch all of Geelong and Carlton, especially once the Blue Baggers kicked out to about a 50-point lead early in the third. But Tommy Stewart was going all right with 83 points in the first three quarters and then dropped off a cliff and did not score after that. So Guelphy has played that defensive forward role in the past. I have a hunch he played it against Stewart earlier this year as well. Let me fact check myself as I go because Tommy Stewart is still a fantastic player. I know Dons haven't played them yet. Must have been imagining that. But we've seen Tommy Stewart have a lot of his fantasy numbers capped this year by having someone run around with him. So if Matty Guelphy does go towards him, Tom Stewart owners, he's not really getting it done. Very similar with the Clayton Oliver theory. It's a great name and a player that all of us have had in our fantasy teams in years past, but I'm not expecting fantastic things from Stu on the weekend. Marcus Windhager is the tagger at the moment. No offense to Toby Bedford, who I pumped up, but Windy will get a chance to shut down Port Adelaide's dynamic duo in Zach Butters and Connor Rosé. Connor Rosé, one of the most popular trade targets this week. I think at the time of recording, he is the most popular. He probably tags Butters, though. I think Butters has been more susceptible to the tag. So as a result, I could see him playing on Connor. And again, he might split time on both if one gets off the chain. But surely he starts on Butters and tries to keep him agitated and run his impact out of the game. A couple of other ones quickly. Chin Cotter going up against the Tigers for Carlton. There aren't many Richmond players worth tagging. So maybe you could go to a Taranto or Bolton, but that one I think is a bit more of a watch and wait and see. In the last game of the round, two players that do run with roles in some capacity. Ruben Jinby, he was running around next to Zach Merritt for most of the game last week. Didn't really stop Merritt from getting his 110 plus, but he did start slow, and Jinby I think was a bit of a factor in that. And Connor Nash, from Hawthorn's standpoint, he's done a similar job, so maybe he's the one that goes back to Harley coming back into the team for the Coasters. I don't think Tim Kelly's back in action, so it seems like Harley Reid is the likely tag. And maybe we see Jinby follow Will Day around or a Jimmy Warple type just to try and nullify their influence a little bit. So there's a couple of the taggers' thoughts and things to consider at the trade table, potentially if you're bringing any of those blokes in. Let's look at the most traded in and out players at the moment. So the aforementioned Connor Rosé is still at the top of the list. So much value to be had by bringing in Connor this week. I do not expect this to change. I expect him to be the most traded in player. Nearly 10,000 coaches have grabbed him And about 8,000 coaches have grabbed his teammate Logan Evans as the second most traded in bloke as well. After that, we have Ari Schoenmaker, Caldwell, Tholstrup, who I've all talked about. Colby McKercher, who went really well in the twos, had 31 disposals and a score of 108. So if Colby's back in, I expect to see the number of coaches trading him in skyrocket. Great value option still. His break evens in the 23 going into this doggies matchup. So Colby's another great bloke, great value pick to try and add to your fantasy squad. Then there's a couple of other random bits and pieces. We got people pouncing on Tom Green, Jai Simpkin, Marcus Bontempelli, all great buys at the moment. A few grabbing Billy Dowling still, nothing wrong with that. And Elliot Yeo, who a couple of coaches asked me about, his ownership percentage sits at 21.5 at the moment. But a lot of those numbers are inflated by coaches that started the season with Yo and aren't really paying attention to fantasy anymore. So I feel like that number, probably half that, is a bit more of a truer reflection for how many coaches are still paying attention to the game and have him in their team. Somewhat of a unique going up against Hawthorn this week, then rolls into a matchup against the D's, Brisbane and St Kilda. So Yoey's coming off a season best 117. He had 110 before his bye as well. Laid 13 tackles in both of those games. So nothing wrong with launching into Elliot Yeo at the moment. And then just behind Billy Dowling, we got Kynan Brown, Errol Goulden, Zach Merritt, and my trade target this week in Dane Zorko. The most traded out blokes, as I mentioned at the top, it's Clayton Oliver and Christian Salem, two underwhelming demons who I think can go for coaches out there. If you've still got rookies on the field, you probably want to address them first, but these two are going to just continue to trend down. Clayton Oliver's break even has lofted up to 131, and his price does start with a 6. So yucky times for Clary Oliver owners. A couple of rookies still being chopped in the form of Joel Frazier and Jeremy Sharp, both of which I think can go. Frazier, you might be able to wring the cloth a little bit for some more value. Tommy Powell, get out of my team. I'm so happy that I'm going to be potentially trading Top Powell this week. Came off a 59 with a 46 before that. There's a lot of coaches out there who are still stuck with him like myself. So let's all rejoice and get rid of Tom Powell and enjoy our fantasy weekends much more. A few other rookies amongst the most traded out. Kane McAuliffe can go. Bruce Revell's an interesting one because he's got a break even of 38. He hasn't really dipped under 60 for a couple of weeks. I mean, he had 57 against St Kilda, but he's been a pretty consistent since he's come into the team of an average almost smack bang on 60. So I do think that you could ride with Bruce and get a little bit more of a price rise. Maybe he has a nice 65-point game against the Ds and he's able to boost his price up closer to the 500K mark. But at 457, if you have to chop him to Logan Evans or Billy Dowling or something like that to regenerate some cash gen in your team, there's nothing wrong with that. I think all these rookies have to go eventually, right? Luke Ryan, another one who's being rage traded out. Break even of 161 rolling into this game against Sydney, which is disgusting. I know Roy and a lot of other fantasy faithful would have brought him in after his bye. He's responded with scores of 68 and 70. I do expect him to bounce back. He had a patch earlier in the year where he had a 63 and an 86 back-to-back. And then he went out and had a 161 against Richmond, followed by a 105 against the Swans. So I'm expecting about 100, maybe a touch more against Sydney this week. But I don't hate the idea of pulling the trigger on Ryan if it helps you. Maybe you go Luke Ryan to Connor Rozee. That might free you up like $200,000, $300,000 to facilitate another upgrade. Still think he's a player that you want to keep, though, because after this Sydney game, Fremantle go Richmond, Hawthorn, Melbourne, and West Coast, which is around when I'll look to target bringing him in. A couple of other trade-out candidates, a lot of rookie names that you've heard of before. Toby Pink, Sam Closey, Jai Clark, Harvey Harrison, Lockie Sullivan, Ryan Angwin, Charlie Dean, Hugo Garcia still floating around, and Bodie Euland, who he went unders, obviously, against Fremantle with a 52, but his season average is almost at the 60-point mark. I think that anyone who tried to play Bodie Euland through the buys and maybe get a little bit fancy, I don't think I'd trust him much more. He does have a break-even of 43, so he should still have one price rise in him, but chopping him to Colby McKercher would make me feel much safer and happier about my squad. And then, yeah, just a couple of other rookies amongst the rest of the trade-out candidates. So what moves am I looking at making this week? I didn't pull the trigger on Jack Steele last round. I thought I would give him one more run. But then I looked into it a little bit more. And this week they have Port Adelaide in Adelaide, which isn't a death sentence, but it's not. Oh, no, it's at Marvel, rather, but it's not great. Then goes against Sydney, also at Marvel. And then a couple of potentially easier games against Adelaide and West Coast. But I do love the form of Connor Rozee. I started the season with him. I think that I've got Butters and Rosie in my team again at the moment. Connor's the one that I probably have the most faith in for the rest of the fantasy season. We've seen Butters get tagged out of games, and Rosie couldn't have been much more impressive against Brisbane, despite how much they got smashed by. 28 disposals, 8 marks, 7 tackles for 115. That is as complete a fantasy stat line as you can see. So Connor Rosie will come in for me this week at the expense of Jack Steele, which means that I can finally get rid of Tom Powell. And I was looking at going Isaac Rankin. I'm really bullish on Rankin as the top 6 forward to close the year. But as I mentioned, a potential Bedford tag and maybe a little bit of a struggle against GWS. Maybe I'm just trying to manifest it and talk it into existence, but he's still at the mid 700 mark. So I've got much more money to spend. So I'm going all the way up and bringing in Dane Zorko. It's about time. Like I said, he's got a couple of games up in a row coming at the Gabba. Hopefully we see some Zorko on our fork and some massive, massive scores. Highly likely he'll be my vice captain on Friday night against the D's as well. And that's it. That is the round 15 wrap up. I'll be back later in the week once the teams are out to preview everything round 16 from the AFL fantasy perspective. Bits and pieces are still filtering through the Patreon page, though. I've dropped the draft waiver wire pickup article. Obviously, now that the buys are over, a lot more draft leagues are back in action. And as I just went through and had a look in my leagues, there's a lot of players who have just kind of been discarded and people have forgotten about them. Will Powell, for example, I picked up in a league. So make sure you scour your waiver wires in case there's some great pickups there. I dropped the reserves report earlier today as well, talking about the best players in the twos over the weekend. So check that one out. And throughout the week, I'll be doing all the usual bits and pieces, including the rookie stock take pod tomorrow night. So make sure you check that one out. Dream Team Talk article will be out for the traders on Wednesday as well. There's still important rookies to have, and cash generation isn't quite afterthought at the moment. So make sure you still have some green dots on your bench. But as always, I appreciate you listening to this episode. Good luck with your trades this week, and I'll catch you next time.